Welcome to Party Street. Today we are going to discuss about the social structure in medieval Europe. The political structure of Western Europe changed with the end of the United Roman Empire. The emperors of the 5th century were often controlled by military strongmen who were partly or fully of non-Roman background. When the line of Western emperors ceased, many of the kings who replaced them were from the same background. Intermarriage between the new kings and the Roman elites was common. This led to a fusion of Roman culture with the customs of the invading tribes, including the popular assemblies that allowed free male tribal members more say in political matters than was common in the Roman state. Material artifacts left by the Romans and the invaders are often similar, and tribal items were often modeled on Roman objects. An important difference was the gradual loss of tax revenue by the new polities. Many of the new political entities no longer supported their armies through taxes, instead relying on granting them lands. Slavery declined as the supply weakened and society became more rural. Between the 5th and 8th centuries, new peoples and individuals filled the political void left by Roman centralized government. The invasions brought new ethnic groups to Europe, although some regions received a larger influx of new peoples than others. The settlement of peoples was accompanied by changes in languages. Beside this, particularly the High Middle Ages was a period of tremendous expansion of population. The estimated population of Europe grew from 35 to 80 million between 1000 and 1347 CE. As much as 90% of the European population remained rural peasants. Many were no longer settled in isolated farms but had gathered into small communities, usually known as manors or villages. These peasants were often subject to noble overlords and owed them rents and other services in a system known as manorialism. There remained a few free peasants throughout this period and beyond, with more of them in the regions of southern Europe than in the north. The practice of assorting or bringing new lands into production by offering incentives to the peasants who settled them also contributed to the expansion of population. The open field system of agriculture was commonly practiced in most of Europe, especially in northwestern and central Europe. Open field agricultural communities had three basic characteristics. Individual peasant holdings in the form of strips of land were scattered among the different fields belonging to their manor. Crops were rotated from year to year to preserve soil fertility, and common land was used for grazing, livestock, and other purposes. Other sections of society included the nobility, clergy, and townsmen. Nobles, both the titled nobility and simple knights, exploited the manors and peasants, although they did not own lands outright, but were granted rights to the income from a manor or other lands by an overlord through the system of feudalism. During the 11th and 12th centuries, these lands or fiefs came to be considered hereditary, and in most areas they were no longer divisible between all the heirs as had been the case in the early medieval period. Instead, most fiefs and lands went to the eldest son. The dominance of the nobility was built upon its control of the land, its military service as heavy cavalry, control of castles, and various immunities from taxes or other impositions. Control of castles allowed the nobles to defy kings or other overlords. Nobles were stratified. Kings and the highest-ranking nobility controlled large numbers of commoners and large tracts of land, as well as other nobles. Beneath them, lesser nobles had authority over smaller areas of land and fewer people. Knights were the lowest level of nobility. They controlled but did not own land and had to serve other nobles. Next class was the clergy. The clergy was divided into two types: the secular clergy who lived out in the world and the regular clergy who lived under a religious rule and were usually monks. Throughout the period, monks remained a very small proportion of the population, usually less than 1%. Most of the regular clergy were drawn from the nobility, the same social class that served as the recruiting ground for the upper levels of the secular clergy. The local parish priests were often drawn from the peasant class. Next were the townsmen. Townsmen were in somewhat unusual position as they did not fit into the traditional threefold division of society into nobles, clergy, and peasants. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the ranks of the townsmen expanded greatly as existing towns grew and new population centers were founded. But throughout the Middle Ages, the population of the towns probably never exceeded 10% of the total population. Jews also spread across Europe during the period. Communities were established in Germany and England in the 11th and 12th centuries, but Spanish Jews, long settled in Spain under the Muslims, came under Christian rule and increasing pressure to convert to Christianity. Beside the Jews, there were other non-Christians on the edges of Europe: pagan Slavs in Eastern Europe and Muslims in Southern Europe. In the next part, we are going to discuss about the position of women. Women in the Middle Ages were officially required to be subordinate to some male, whether their father, husband, or other kinsman. Widows, who were often allowed much control over their own lives, were still restricted legally. Women's work generally consisted of household or other domestically inclined tasks. Peasant women could supplement the household income by spinning or brewing at home. At harvest time, they were also expected to help with field work. Townswomen, like peasant women, were responsible for the household and could also engage in trade. Noble women were responsible for running a household and could occasionally be expected to handle estates in the absence of male relatives, but they were usually restricted from participation in military or government affairs. The only role open to women in the church was that of nuns, as they were unable to become priests. In central and northern Italy and in Flanders, the rise of towns, those were to a degree of self-governing, stimulated economic growth and created an environment for new type of trade associations. Commercial cities on the shores of Baltic entered into agreements known as the Hanseatic League, and the Italian maritime republics such as Venice, Genoa, and Pisa expanded their trade throughout the Mediterranean. In the late 13th century, new land and sea routes to the Far East were pioneered. famously described in the Travels of Marco Polo, written by one of the traders, Marco Polo. New forms of commercial contracts emerged, allowing risk to be shared among merchants. All these changes brought new trends in the society further. So this is the end of our today's discussion. Subscribe our channel and like our video and comment. Listen to our podcast episodes. Follow our official Facebook page, Twitter handle and Instagram. For any query, feel free to mail us. For details, see the description.